Tonight on Primetime, President Zelensky reviews Trump's 28-point peace plan. Ukraine contemplates major concessions, while Moscow claims Kyiv's room to maneuver is shrinking. The stakes for Ukraine's future have rarely been higher. Good evening. Well, tonight we break down what's actually inside this peace plan, why it has emerged now, and how the reactions from Kyiv, Moscow, and European capitals could determine whether this becomes a pathway to negotiation or another flashpoint in an already volatile war. With a Zelensky and Trump call expected next week, diplomats warn the coming days may prove decisive.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says he's dedicated for honest work on the US peace proposal that he formally received on Thursday. The 28-point plan was delivered by US Army Secretary Daniel Driscoll and aims to intensify negotiations to end the nearly four-year war. Zelensky says Kyiv is reviewing it with Washington and European partners.
The American side provided its proposals, the points of the plan to end the war. Their vision. Ukraine needs peace, and a real peace that will not be broken by a third invasion. We agreed that our teams will work on these proposals. We will not make abrupt statements. We are committed to clear and honest work with the United States, with Europe, and with our partners around the world. I expect to speak with President Trump in the coming days. We know that the strength and support of America can truly bring peace closer, and we do not want to lose that.
In the proposal, Ukraine would surrender additional eastern territory in exchange for long-term US security guarantees. According to US and Ukrainian officials cited by news agency Axios, the framework would grant Russia full de facto control of all of Luhansk and Donetsk and freeze current lines in Kherson and Zaporizhia, with withdrawn areas becoming a demilitarized buffer. The plan also calls for Kyiv to cap its armed forces, limit long-range weapons, and renounce NATO membership conditions Ukrainian officials say are unacceptable. Sources say Qatar and Turkey helped shape the draft, and that Zelensky's national security advisor Rustem Umerov held direct talks with Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says Washington is preparing serious and realistic ideas, arguing that any durable peace will require difficult compromises on both sides.
Well, as talks of peace continue, Ukraine's city of Kupiansk has reportedly been captured by Russian forces, although Kyiv denies this claim.
Russia's army says it has taken control of the strategic city of Kupiansk in Ukraine's Kharkiv region. However, Ukraine's military denies the city has changed hands. President Vladimir Putin visited the command post of Russia's West Group on Thursday, where commanders briefed him on the army's progress in the city.
Units of the West Grouping have liberated the city of Kupiansk and are continuing to destroy Ukrainian armed forces units surrounded on the left bank of the Oskol River.
The army says it has also captured more than 80% of Vovchansk in the Kharkiv region, with further advances underway in Pokrovsk, another strategic city in eastern Ukraine. Russia has been pressuring Pokrovsk for more than a year, using a pincer movement in an attempt to encircle it and cut supply lines. Russian military maps now show the city under Russian control, with Ukrainian troops surrounded in nearby Mirnohrad. Moscow says that capturing Pokrovsk would provide a platform to push north toward the two largest remaining Ukrainian-held cities in the Donetsk region, Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. However, Ukraine also dismisses that Russian forces have taken over large parts of Pokrovsk and Vovchansk near the Russian border. Meanwhile, Ukraine's Air Force said it carried out fresh strikes on an oil refinery in the Russian city of Ryazan in an effort to weaken Russia's military economic capacity. The attack cut power to parts of the southwestern Kursk region overnight, leaving more than 16,000 residents without electricity, according to regional authorities. These developments come as US Army Secretary Daniel Driscoll met Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv on Thursday to discuss a new US drafted proposal for Russia-Ukraine peace talks.
Well, joining me now is Alexei Haran, Professor of Politics at Kyiv Mohyla Academy in Kyiv, Ukraine. Professor, thank you very much for joining us, not least because in the last few seconds you've just experienced a blackout, and we thank you very much for bearing with us. We are delighted to have you with us for as long as this link lasts, so please do bear with us. I wanted to start by asking you, President Zelensky says he won't betray the national interest. He's clearly focused on preserving dignity. But as painful as it may be to admit, isn't there a sense here in which everybody knows that he is going to have to give up something?
Well, these are negotiations. Look, if we are talking about compromises, okay, compromises are possible and even difficult, painful compromises. But, for example, we understand that we cannot liberate at this point the occupied territory. So if we have a ceasefire along the front line, it will be very painful compromise for us because occupied Ukrainian territories for the time being will remain under Russian control. And we know, you need to know what Russia is doing on these territories. It's a terror. It's, repressions about anything Ukrainian. So they would like to crush Ukrainian identity. But we are ready to have a ceasefire along the front line. That's what we are ready for. But in this so-called plan, there is a demand that Putin not only keeps the occupied territories, that he will be given even more territories, the whole Donbass. At this point, he doesn't control the whole of Donbass. So it looks very, very strange. Let me underline that what we are discussing, so-called 28 points plan, it's not a rigid plan. It's a framework for discussion. From what I understand, from what we know about these negotiations and discussions, it's not like position signed or we will kill. No. From my understanding, the US are also ready for discussion. Definitely, you cannot decide the future of Europe and Ukraine without Europe and Ukraine. For example, in this so-called plan, Russia and the United States agrees to provide a clear path for Ukrainian integration into EU. But come on, guys, who is deciding about Ukrainian integration into the EU? Russia? United States? No, it's the EU and Ukraine. So some, points are really, really strange. And what is written right now, I would say, what is suggested for debate right now, it looks like capitulation of Ukraine. For example, it will be from Ukraine to its military capacity. Come on, guys, what we are about? We are by aggressor, and we are demanded, to shorten our army and our forces. This is very strange. I think sometimes, Mr. Trump does stand all the Nobel Prize. That's what we know about.
Well, I was going to ask.
He doesn't understand.
I was sorry to interrupt.
Right.
I was going to ask you, Professor. What is your thinking behind? Why is it so vague, so broad? Is it necessarily that way because to bring parties together, you obviously can't go into too much detail straight away because you need to leave room for negotiation, or is it?
No, actually.
Okay, give us your analysis.
Yeah, well, actually, unfortunately, 8 points, and these 28 points or decides for Ukraine a lot of aspects of our domestic policy for a demand to have presidential elections during 1 day. Come on, guys. It's not for the US and Russia to decide when we will elections. I am very critical of what Zelensky is doing. But we Unions, we agreed that it's not time now to consider elections until we have this war. Okay, we will need ceasefire and then to prepare carefully for elections. Not like, well, up, we stop the killings and immediately we will have elections. No, it's much more difficult. So it will be very strange if Russia dictates to us when we should conduct presidential elections during the war or immediately after the war. That's for us, Ukrainians, to decide. And I would like also to stress that now we have scandal in Ukraine about corruption at quite high levels. But what Ukrainians are saying, including opposition, all of us are saying that we are ready to provide all the necessary support to Zelensky, because at this point, Zelensky is defending Ukraine. Okay, we may criticize him, what he is doing within the country, what is personnel policy, and so on. But we supporting him in defending national interests of Ukraine. That's very important.
There's a school of thought, Professor, that says that actually identifying the corruption scandal actually made the country look good. It showed the country was prepared to weed out corruption, which is something that exists in all societies. So rather than actually detracting from the reputation of Ukraine's leadership, it actually showed that they were prepared to admit their own weaknesses and solve those problems.
Okay, so yes, you are right. Ukraine, I mean, first of all, President Zelensky, so now he has the time to demonstrate that his presidency cases will be investigated, in all the cases of corruption. So basically, if he would do that, I think that he will restore his popularity among Ukrainians, which until recently was very high. The trust to him was almost 60%, which is extremely high, given that this is the end of fourth year of the war. So yes, we have this possibility, and we were always demanded that in our struggle for corruption, we need to catch big fish. So now we have a big fish. Okay, so the question is how this investigation will continue, and how it will be delivered directly to the court. Okay, but you are right. There is a silver lining in the cloud.
And we've heard, obviously, we know that European leaders are not happy about being left out of the initial construction of this plan. What about Russia? What is Russia signaling at this point about negotiations? And also, what is your evaluation of their reaction to what we've heard about this plan?
Well, Russia signals that Russia doesn't want to have any concessions. They would continue and to have even more. This is clearly what is written in this draft. I would say, let's call it draft. It's not the final plan. So, but Russia demonstrates very clearly. Russia continues bombardment of Ukraine. You see in darkness. That's the result of what Russia doing against energy infrastructure. Russia continues to kill civilians every day. Doesn't want to have a peace. They would like to continue. They meet in different forms, disguising, and then continue. So in this document, I would say there's nothing that demonstrates that Russia is looking for concessions. And when we talk about EU, as I have said, about EU is left aside. It's simply because you cannot decide for what will be done in Europe in the same way for Ukraine.
And Professor, I just finally wanted to ask you about what happens next. We know we're expecting a phone call between Presidents Trump and Zelensky. What do you expect to be the constituent elements of that phone call? And frankly, how do you expect that to go?
We don't know. Again, I think that our diplomacy do everything is possible, which is possible, not only in talking to Trumps, but also talking to Europeans, to our allies. So they will do whatever is possible. And in this, as I say, they rely now on Ukrainian army. A lot depends on the situation on the front line. Okay, we need to defend ourselves. Very difficult. We Ukrainians are now in a very difficult situation, physically conditions. Again, you see me in dark, but we don't want to give up. So we don't know. There is an optimistic scenario. Both European Ukraine would be able to explain to Trump what is inaccessible and to ask Trump to be more harsh in with Russia. This is one way optimistic scenario. There is a pessimistic scenario, and there is something in the middle.
Professor, we thank you very much for your analysis, and particularly considering that you have provided it given very difficult circumstances during a blackout. Thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you.
After the break, leaders convene in Johannesburg as the G20 summit gets underway. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching PrimeTime. South Africa is preparing to host the G20 summit for the first time, with world leaders arriving in Johannesburg for the two-day event. Now, the summit will bring together the world's largest economies to discuss global trade, economic growth, and pressing international challenges. Here's more.
G20 leaders have begun arriving in South Africa ahead of the summit, which opens on Saturday. The two-day event, held under the motto Solidarity, Equality and Sustainability, will bring together heads of state from 15 countries across Europe, Asia and South America. They are expected to take part in 3 sessions focused on global challenges and priorities, including sustainable economic growth, development and financing. Britain's Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has landed in Johannesburg, defending his decision to attend despite the UK budget being only days away. He is also expected to announce a new deal under which the UK will provide strategic advice and consultancy services to South Africa's railways. Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has also arrived. Lula is likely to bring to the summit what could become one of the key outcomes of the soon-to-conclude COP30 in Brazil. G20 nations are considered crucial in shaping the global response to climate change, accounting for 85% of the world economy and more than 3/4 of climate warming emissions. Also attending are Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and Chinese Premier Li Qiang. Premier Li is scheduled to hold bilateral meetings with several world leaders during the conference. Police and army units staged a show of force earlier in the week, and a hard lockdown came into effect on Friday around the Nasrec Expo Centre and FNB Stadium, where leaders will convene. This year marks the first time a G20 summit is being held on African soil, with South Africa the continent's only member state. The administration of US President Donald Trump has said it will not attend, alleging that the host country, once ruled by a white minority apartheid government until 1994, discriminates against white people. While a US boycott could undercut South Africa's agenda, Pretoria said the absence was Washington's loss and that it still expected a successful summit.
Well, joining me now in the studio to discuss this is the Africa and Middle East political analyst Abenour Toumi, joining us from Paris. Mr. Toumi, thank you very much for joining us on Prime Time. Just lay out the basics for us, please. What are the main priorities for leaders at this year's G20?
Good evening, and thank you for having me on the program. Actually, it is, I mean, as it was mentioned in the reportage, it is the first G20 summit to be held in Africa, in which it is historic because the form's expansion of its aim of this gathering, international leaders gathering, was on, I mean, basically focused on global financial and economic issues. And this is actually was the start when it was created or founded in 1999. But what is happening now in light of this, I mean, we live in a tumultuous international system where international relations are in a critical time of uncertainty. And this is why it's very interesting, I mean, to see the absence of a major player in this world forum, the US. And this is brings us to that actually, I mean, the forum itself, itself has actually, I mean, has been knowing some serious developments in the last 2 decades, but this time is particular. I mean, we see these diversity and to some extent this rivalry between what we are calling it now the global south versus the global north, and particularly has become ideological. And when you see the US argument for not being in this interesting summit, as I said, it is historic and it is held in Africa. And now we all know how Africa, the African continent, has become a hub of regional powers and superpowers in terms of geopolitics and geo-economics sphere. And so this is going to be very interesting to see how this will play out in this summit.
Yes, indeed. I mean, it's very interesting, isn't it? All across the continent, you know, we can see success stories, can't we? Nigeria, there's an economic boom, growth in the population. We've seen tremendous stories of innovation in North African countries. In the east of the continent, of course, investment and development in countries like Rwanda over the last few decades and years has hit the headlines. As you say, every major power in the world seems to want to build partnerships, do business on the continent of Africa. And with all that in mind, if President Trump does not attend this G20, do you think countries like China will pounce on that opportunity and look to fill that vacuum, perhaps?
Actually, they did. I mean, the Chinese, the Russians, and as I said, the regional powers, I mean, like Turkey and other countries, so are actually positioning themselves in this dynamic of, in this posture of dynamic of, again, international politics. And this is why we see how China, I mean, has been challenging the US for decades now, and this is not new. And we see actually it is kind of paradoxal when you see the absence of the US president, I mean, to miss this opportunity. And because, I mean, the US has also solid ties with Africa, and goes back to the times of the Cold War and so on. But this time it's very, very unique. And as you said, there is these developments and this mobility of actually positive mobilities of the countries, African countries, from the now north, east, west to the south. I mean, talk about Egypt, Algeria, and Ethiopia on the east, Nigeria, Ghana, Rwanda, South Africa, and also even Angola. And I mean, which is interesting, we are in this time of these geopolitics and geoeconomics fight about the natural resources and so on. And we see how these countries, I mean, superpowers, are very hungry, I mean, to position themselves and to work with Africa. And which is interesting, there is the dynamic of new African leaders who are actually challenging the former colonizers. I mean, like France, we saw how France has, I mean, lost a great deal its hegemony in Francophone Africa, notably in African Sahel, and how the UK was sided, and also even the Dutch and so on. But the Africans are actually, they are, again, we talk about ideology, and they are not focusing anymore about this ideology because, I mean, they know well that the time of the Cold War has ended, but there is now a new dynamic of this mobility is to deal neck to neck and with those super powers. I mean, who are actually making the African continent the new geopolitics and economics of like a sphere of power and affluence.
Yeah, you mentioned France and others, the colonial history obviously making partnerships difficult, testing relationships for understandable reasons. Nevertheless, European countries are still extremely keen to do business, to partner across Africa. India too, other countries. Give us a sense of what these other big players will be bringing to the table at the G20.
Actually, like there is a very interesting. I mean, the parameter of the Chinese, for instance, and even the Russians, but not less than the Chinese, how they look to their partnership with the African countries. I mean, they don't go and lecture them about human rights values and democracy and so on. Sure, I mean, there are some issues about those African leaders in terms of, governing system problems and corruptions and so on. But this is not unique to Africa, it's across the globe. But the Chinese are also looking at those leaders, and I mean, when I mean by leaders, political leaders, the media, the elite, and even to the people as a human being. I mean, they don't look at them from like kind of, like, as I said, lecturing them about those human rights and democracy and imposing like, Western values. They are having this pragmatism of like, win-win. And this is works very well for the Africans, particularly the African new generation who are actually tired about those former colonizers, like, for instance, again, the French leaders who have been lecturing them for decades. And this is when we see this fight now, how France lost its I mean, hegemony and influence in African side, for instance. And President Macron is, again, we saw how he started his visit. I mean, he has an African tour visit. He's going to be like visiting 5 countries. I mean, he started with Mauritius Islands. It's, again, still a French colony. But the Africans are not taking that picture as if they were like, those Africa, we talk about Africa, we talk about like that dark picture of corruptions, famine, natural disasters, and so on. Now we're talking about Africa, about growth, mobility, and partnership with the world leaders. And this is why, again, for President Donald Trump, I think he missed an opportunity now, and that actually he has now, I mean, a special Africa envoy, and actually was just a week or two weeks ago. I mean, he positioned himself like for being a mediator between Rwanda and DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. And also he knows well, I mean, Americans know well that Chinese are very, very implemented there, and they have, I mean, a huge influence when it comes to the trade and commerce exchange, and also, I mean, positioning themselves in terms of geopolitics and geoeconomics for having those. I mean, the Chinese, they don't call military bases, but they look like military bases. I mean, are whether in Djibouti and other countries in the continent. And there is another element here too. I mean, particularly for the U.S. President, Mr. Donald Trump, I mean, who has been, has that appetite about the the rare earth minerals across the globe. I mean, he has his eyes on Africa, but and again, he missed an opportunity. But after all, I mean, the Americans, I mean, they don't look at Africa from the integral perspective, but they deal on the bilateral level. And this is also, it's another opportunity for African countries to deal with superpowers.
Yeah, it's very interesting indeed. Whenever there is a big gathering such as this, whether it's COP or the World Economic Forum, there's a sense in which I think people look at it and they say, well, look, conceptual alignment is good, positive sentiment is welcome, but what about the concrete results? So when you look at G20, when you look at what's coming, are you expecting any tangible outcomes to emerge from the event?
This is a good question, and this is why actually the people are expecting from those forums and those world leaders gathering. This, because the main thing it's about growth, but when you talk about growth, it's also about well-being for the people, and also, I mean, sure, I mean, there are like, I mean, Africa, it's again very rich continent, and I mean, countries are very rich also, but unfortunately, I mean, they have been going through very tough and rough times, as again, bad governance, and also corruptions, and also, you know, like wars and so on. But this is the time why there is this new generation who are, again, as I stated earlier, I mean, they are dealing with, with the West, particularly from this win-win paradigm, and also neck to neck. And again, they are saying enough is enough and stop lecturing us. And we need your help. We need in terms of development in technology and, you know, industrializations and so on. But again, there is this challenge that is coming, as I said, from the Chinese, who are filling up this vacuum. Or again, those countries, African countries, now they have this maneuver, I mean, to no longer be aligned to the Western capitals, so, or their former colonizers. I mean, they have now the possibility to go east, I mean, to the Chinese, to the Indians. And also there is an interesting here, the dynamic in this, particularly this summit. And as I said, when it, you know, it comes to this equation of South versus the North, but there is a BRICS plus in between. And we saw how those countries are leaning toward the BRICS plus, and these economic and, I mean, geoeconomics, and it will be one day a solid geopolitics bloc that will challenge the Westerners, and notably the US.
Yeah, it's a very important point indeed. Mr. Toomey, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll take a very short break now. When we're back, Katie Wilson will be with us breaking down the top business news stories of the day. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Prime Time now. Katie Wilson is here with the very latest business news stories. Katie, what have you got for us?
Well, guys, it's been a busy week on the market and in global politics. Delayed data drops, surprise policy pivots, and even a shake-up in European aviation. Let's take a closer look. First up, the long-delayed US jobs report finally landed, and it brought a mixed bag. Hiring in September was far stronger than expected, but unemployment still edged up. The release, pushed back by a record government shutdown, adds another twist to an already murky labour picture, shaped by AI pressures and shifting industries.
A much-delayed U.S. jobs report showed hiring in September beat expectations, but the unemployment rate ticked up. The report showed U.S. non-farm payrolls grew by 119,000 for that month, higher than the average forecast of 50,000 jobs, according to economists polled by Reuters. The unemployment rate increased 0.1 of a percentage point to 4.4%. Thursday's report had been due on October 3rd, but was delayed by the record 43-day government shutdown. That shutdown forced the government's Bureau of Labor Statistics to cancel the release of an October jobs report, as no data was collected for that agency's household survey. Heading into the economic data blackout, the BLS had estimated that about 911,000 fewer jobs were created in the 12 months through March than previously reported. The delayed and canceled releases of closely watched measures of U.S. economic strength come amid rising tests of the job market. The growth of artificial intelligence is eroding demand for labor. Most of that pain is landing on entry-level positions, locking recent college graduates out of work. Despite the overall job growth, some sectors are shedding jobs, including transportation and warehousing, and some economists say the murky picture and lack of data could influence the Federal Reserve's December policy meeting. Fed officials will not have November's jobs report in hand after its release date was pushed back to the middle of the following month.
Still in the US, Wall Street's early excitement didn't last. Even strong Nvidia results couldn't stop stocks from sliding yesterday. Investors were digesting that delayed jobs report, which showed hotter than expected hiring, a shift that could keep the Fed from cutting rates soon. One standout, Walmart, which jumped after lifting its outlook once again.
Wall Street stocks fell Thursday, despite upbeat results from Nvidia, with the Dow slipping close to 1%, the S&P 500 dropping 1.5%, and the Nasdaq declining more than 2%. Both the Nasdaq and Dow swung more than 1,000 points from their highs of the day to their lows. Shares of Nvidia ended 3% lower after surging as much as 5% earlier in the day. Most chip-related companies also ended lower. The early rally faded as investors assessed the jobs report from September, which was released late because of the government shutdown. The report showed that job growth accelerated, which may lead the Federal Reserve to keep rates where they are at its next meeting, says Mark Gibbons, Chief Investment Officer with Gibbons Capital Management.
The jobs report came in at around 120,000 jobs added, a little bit hotter than when we expected. And what that means is that may pressure the Federal Reserve to actually not cut rates at their December meeting. It wasn't too long ago, maybe a month or so ago, that they were expected to cut by 25 basis points. Now that's more of like a 40-60 proposition, as far as 60% being that they are going to be on pause.
One bright spot on the down day was Walmart, which advanced 6.5% after the retailer raised its annual forecast for the second time this year.
President Trump has lifted his steep 40% tariffs on Brazilian food products, a sharp reversal after months of higher prices for US shoppers. The move ends penalties imposed over Brazil's prosecution of Jair Bolsonaro, and it forms part of a broader push to ease food costs as Trump faces slipping approval ratings.
U.S. President Donald Trump on Thursday removed his 40% tariffs on Brazilian food products. That includes levies on beef, coffee, and fruits that were imposed in July to punish Brazil over the prosecution of its former president and Trump ally, Jair Bolsonaro. The order will affect Brazilian imports to the U.S. on or after November 13 and may also require a refund of the duties collected on those goods while the tariffs were still being charged, according to the text of the order released by the White House. The move follows a similar order by the administration last Friday to remove tariffs on several agricultural products from other countries. That's as the White House reverses course on measures that have driven up the cost of food in the U.S., which is a major factor behind Trump's declining approval ratings. Brazil has recently become an important supplier of beef to the U.S. and normally supplies a third of the coffee used in the country. Retail coffee prices in the U.S., the world's largest coffee drinker, rose as much as 40% this year due to the tariffs and other market factors. Trump's executive order on Thursday did not mention the actions against Brazilian authorities involved in the prosecution and conviction of Bolsonaro for plotting a coup to remain in power after losing the 2022 election. Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva welcomed the removal of the tariffs.
Today, I am happy because President Trump has already begun to reduce some of the tariffs that had been imposed on certain Brazilian products.
Skipping across the Pacific now, and Japan's new Prime Minister is hitting the ground running. Sanae Takaishi's cabinet has approved a hefty $135 billion stimulus package, the country's biggest since the pandemic, complete with tax cuts and major spending. But while she insists it's fiscally sound, markets are uneasy as investors eye Japan's growing debt.
Japan's ruling cabinet approved a massive $135.4 billion stimulus package on Friday. It's the first major policy move under new Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. She had pledged to push for more ambitious fiscal measures before her election. The package includes general account outlays of just under $113 billion, well above the previous year's figure. It also marks the largest stimulus since the pandemic and includes $17.2 billion in tax cuts. But markets have grown more concerned about the country's fiscal position and Takaichi's stimulus plans. The yen has hit 10-month lows, while super-long government bond yields have seen record highs. Takaichi stressed the package fully takes into account fiscal sustainability. She said funding will come from higher than expected tax revenues and non-tax income, and also said any remaining shortfall will be covered by issuing additional government bonds. Sources said the size of the bond issuance has still to be finalised, but they added it's expected to be larger than the $42.6 billion of last year. The Cabinet plans to approve a supplementary budget to fund the package as early as next week. It also aims to gain parliamentary approval by the end of the year.
To aviation now, and Lufthansa has officially stepped forward to pursue a minority stake in Portugal's TAP, joining a growing list of major European carriers eyeing the long-delayed privatisation. Lisbon is offering nearly 45% of the airline to a buyer that can boost TAP's scale and competitiveness, and interest is heating up fast.
Germany's Lufthansa Airlines submitted a proposal on Thursday for a minority stake in Portugal's carrier TAP. The company said it has formally filed its interest with the government via state holding company Par Publica. Rivals British Airways and Air France KLM have also expressed interest in buying up TAP's planned sale of shares. Portugal's government relaunched a long-delayed privatisation plan for TAP in July, putting a 44.9% stake up for sale to an airline that could add scale and competitiveness. An additional 5% is to be sold to TAP employees. The government said last month it expects the planned sale of the combined stake to proceed smoothly. Airlines interested in TAP must formally submit a manifestation of interest by November 21 and non-binding offers in the coming months. Lufthansa said its aspirations as an investor took into account TAP's, quote, great strategic importance to the European aviation industry.
And finally, from Nvidia's soaring sales outlook to Japan's hefty new stimulus plan, it's been a week packed with big numbers and even bigger headlines. Here's a quick look at the standout figures shaping markets, tech and sports this week.
From Nvidia's fortunes easing the AI bubble fears to a new investor for the Mercedes Formula One team, this is the week in numbers. $65 billion is how much Nvidia expects for its fiscal fourth quarter sales. The world's most valuable company also announced third quarter sales rose 62%, their first acceleration in 7 quarters. Global markets have looked to the chip designer to see whether investing billions of dollars in AI infrastructure expansion has resulted in an AI bubble. A $135 billion economic stimulus package was approved by Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's cabinet. It marks the first major policy initiative under the new leader, who's pledged to pursue expansionary fiscal measures. It's also Tokyo's largest stimulus since the pandemic. Xiaomi reported a near 81% jump in third quarter profit. It comes with the Chinese tech giant moving further towards electric vehicles. Xiaomi is also the world's third largest smartphone maker. It said the quarterly growth was driven by EVs, AI and other new projects. Bitcoin fell to around $82,000 on Friday, falling to its lowest level in more than 6 months. The decline comes amid a broad sell-off in riskier assets. One analyst recently told Reuters that because cryptocurrencies generally move with the stock market, they haven't become an asset of alternative value to hedge against fear in other sectors. A 15% stake in the Mercedes Formula One team is how much CrowdStrike CEO George Kurtz now owns. It comes out of the 1/3 stake held by principal Toto Wolff. No financial details were given for the personal acquisition, but media reports last week said the deal valued the former champions at a record $6 billion.
Well, there we have it. That's the latest from business around the world. Back to you, Guy.
Thanks, Katie. A great way to round off the week. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, after the break, staying on business-related stories, we'll look at the latest Bitcoin volatility saga and how the wider crypto market is reacting. Do stay with us. Welcome back. Now, Bitcoin has plunged to levels not seen in over 6 months. It's hard to keep up, but it's now trading at about $81,000. Its market value has fallen by more than 9% in just 24 hours. Well, let's get into what's driving this latest batch of volatility across the crypto market.
Bitcoin dropped on Friday to levels not seen in more than 6 months. The price of flagship digital currency has dropped to around $81,000 per Bitcoin. Bitcoin's market capitalization dropped by 9.1% over the past day to $1.67 trillion, while the daily trading volume rose 40% to $113.4 billion. The total value of the global cryptocurrency market, including Bitcoin, declined 8.5% in the last 24 hours to $2.87 trillion, reflecting the latest overall global crypto market situation. The sharp decline comes as expectations for a US Federal Reserve rate cut weakened, thus reducing investor appetite for riskier assets such as cryptocurrencies. Stronger than expected US labor market data signaled that the Fed may keep interest rates higher for longer, putting additional pressure on digital assets. Analysts also note that growing concerns over tech sector overvaluation may have triggered a broader risk-off mood in global markets. The shift has led many investors to move away from speculative assets, intensifying volatility in the crypto space. Additionally, the rapid price drop has activated liquidations of leveraged positions, increasing selling pressure and accelerating the downturn across the market.
Okay, joining me now to discuss this is AIM-User's Andy Mioch. Andy, Bitcoin, it's fallen below 81,000. Well, it's gone up and down. It's quite hard to keep up on its exact valuation, but that has happened for the first time since April. What's driving the sell-off and why now?
Well, Guy, we are quite a long way off from the historical all-time peak of Bitcoin that we saw in early October when it was trading for more than $126,000 per unit. Now, this current situation that saw Bitcoin shed more than a quarter of its value since then has prompted some analysts to say that chances of it ending the year below $90,000 are now increasing. When it comes to the causes of the slump, we've heard from Binance chief executive saying that this sharp drop is due to investors deleveraging cryptocurrency holdings and risk aversion in line with that seen with other major asset classes, basically saying that what we're seeing with crypto prices is what we've seen on the broader markets. We've heard our very own Katie Wilson talking about the earnings and the buy and sell of the week. The global market sold off because investors were rattled by an AI-led valuation bubble and fears that that bubble might burst. Even the better than expected results of the leading artificial intelligence chip maker NVIDIA have not eased or calmed those worries when we take a look at the entire year. All cryptocurrencies, but Bitcoin primarily, as it is the dominant cryptocurrency, had climbed steadily after US President Donald Trump took office. back in January, promising to make the U.S. a, quote, crypto heaven. But the optimism faded later when the trade tensions surfaced. Bitcoin began the year at $93.5 thousand and fell to 74.5K in April after a broader market sell-off triggered by the announcement of the U.S. president of those so-called Liberation Day tariffs, basically reciprocal tariffs. The crypto market picked up again when the tariff anxieties eased, reaching that October peak we mentioned on the get-go. Coming to this point now, if we draw the line, Bitcoin's price is now about 10% below what it was at the start of the year.
Okay, so not crypto heaven, as President Trump hoped for, but not quite crypto hell. Bitcoin is the most famous of the cryptocurrencies, but it's not the only currency, is it? How have the other cryptocurrencies fared?
There seems to be a major trend here. Obviously, Bitcoin took the largest nosedive, and it's the most valuable and most famous crypto coin to have. If you know someone who holds cryptocurrencies, they're more than likely to indeed have Bitcoin. But others, such as the second most valuable cryptocurrency by market cap, Ethereum, had also dropped to about $2,600 for it. It was the 4-month low. That's about 20% of a drop when compared to a year ago. Other cryptocurrencies followed suit. They've been hit, for example, XRP, Binance's BNB, and Solana's SOL, falling between 8 and 10% over the past day. These numbers, of course, fluctuate very, very volatilely. So we have maybe some other percentages right now. This also happened to those so-called meme coins. Do you remember that Dogecoin with the face of a Japanese dog? That's the most popular one. It also lost a bit more than 10% over the past day.
Andy, I'll tell you what my problem is with Bitcoin. I should preface this by saying that I'm not authorized to give any financial advice. Neither are you, neither is A-News. But my problem with Bitcoin and with cryptocurrencies is I don't fully get what they're for. So I understand the investment opportunity. You know, you want to make some money, you're prepared to risk the volatility. But as an alternative currency, I guess I just don't understand why. What's the point? And when you look on LinkedIn and other communities, you see all this striving, yearning, come on guys, we're almost there. Don't sell your Bitcoin, stick with it. I don't understand what's driving, what's motivating it. It doesn't seem to me to be any big, inherent, benevolent cause behind it all. I guess I just don't see the point.
The main driver, at least for some people, is that it is a decentralized type of currency. It doesn't depend on any type of central bank. It has less regulations than what you would expect from, I don't know, Brussels, Washington, Moscow, Beijing, and so on. However, there are a number of countries that have accepted Bitcoin, most famously El Salvador. If you can remember, major quantity of Bitcoins was bought by the government over there. Of course, the United States as well. We can remember that the US President Donald Trump months ago signed an executive order on establishing somewhat of a crypto reserve for the United States. There are no official hard numbers on how much cryptocurrencies and in what quantities does Washington possess. But according to data of blockchain analytics firm Arkham, the U.S. government is sitting on roughly $29.7 billion in digital assets. They got their estimate by tracking more than 600 labeled wallets linked to federal seizures.
Yeah, I guess it's a very interesting argument that you make there, and I have seen that made before, and I guess others much cleverer people than me may well be convinced by it. I suppose I just think the argument about the democratization, well, I can understand an argument where people would say, well, you know, central banks with normal currency as we would know it, those central banks sort of consolidate power and authority, and potentially you could have corruption and influence, and certain people are locked out of decision making. I can understand that. But equally, you know, throwing this over to a system that's completely anonymous, you know, equally can sort of lock people out of decision making too. At least you can fire central bankers when they don't perform well. And the other element that's often raised is that, well, it's much more secure because, of course, it's just an electronic statement of a value, and therefore it can't be stolen. But we've seen many cases where, we saw one case in the UK where somebody was making the point about how Bitcoin couldn't be stolen because of the inherent technology and how strong it was, and then someone broke into their house, put a gun to their head and said, give me all your Bitcoin, and they handed it over in the same way that they would hand over cash. So I guess my point is I don't see the innovation in quite the same way as perhaps others do, but maybe it's just me.
There was also one fun case, I believe it was Germany, but somewhere in Central to West Europe, where someone had a physical wallet on a USB flash drive containing a large amount of Bitcoin, and they threw it out accidentally. The man spent the next 7 to 8 years paying so workers could inspect the garbage dumps. Nothing came of it, unfortunately, for him. But when it comes to these institutions, they do have an impact in a certain way. This sharp decline that we saw on all the cryptocurrencies was not only fueled by the markets. One other major factor was the US Federal Reserve. Investors are betting that the Federal Reserve won't cut interest rates next month, which would make Bitcoin and its peers less appealing when it comes when compared to interest-bearing investments such as bonds and savings accounts. As for whether there will be a cut, a record of the most recent meeting of the Fed's policy setting committee showed deep divisions among its members. The minutes of the Federal Open Market Committee's October meeting said that, quote, in discussing the near-term course of monetary policy, participants expressed strongly differing views about what policy decision would most likely be appropriate at the committee's December meeting. Financial Times, for example, is reporting, citing CME Group data, that the probability of another quarter-point cut in December had fallen from a near certainty to about 30% over the past month.
Yeah, it's interesting, that relationship between the Fed and the crypto market. I mean, let's get back to the numbers and away from my cynicism about the currency. How much has the global crypto market then lost this week?
I've used some data from market trackers. I've been to CoinGecko. They're saying that the global cryptocurrency market cap currently sits about $2.9 trillion. That's the freshest data I got prior to this show. Last week's market cap was at 3.4 trillion. So that's a drop of $500 billion. In the last 6 weeks, about $1.2 trillion has been wiped off, clean of the market value of all the cryptocurrencies across the board. And for some context on a shorter time frame, in the last 24 hours, the crypto market dropped by 8%.
Wow, staggering amounts of money. Of course, as I've mentioned, neither you nor I nor this channel are authorized to give official financial advice. Nevertheless, there will be a lot of people watching who will not have my view, who will be very interested in crypto investing. What should people be looking out for now? We've had this volatility. What should people be watching over the coming days and weeks to help them make an informed decision?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Given the volatility of the market you so rightfully mentioned, it would not be safe to assume anything. Now, it's very important to say that investing in crypto, such as Bitcoin or any other coin, carries significant risks as it operates, as we mentioned prior to this, outside traditional regulatory frameworks, leaving investors with no financial protections if something goes wrong. Simply put, investors may lose all of their money. However, what I can give you are some quotes from people who know about this a bit better. Head of research at the online options platform Derive.xyz said that the, quote, powder keg of volatility in tech valuations could see Bitcoin sink to $75,000 before the end of the year, adding that those prices should quickly rebound from that level. We've got some more from analysts from the financial research firm 7 Report. They wrote today that from a demand perspective, quote, it appears that there is an early yet growing sense of concern that could evolve into full-on panic if the selling pressure continues to intensify further than it already has, as lower prices would prompt more selling in a doom loop of sorts. Wow. Now, Barron's is reporting that there could be sizable price swings next week, given that volumes are likely to be thin from Thursday onward due to the Thanksgiving holiday over in the United States. They go on to say that that means it wouldn't take too much pressure for Bitcoin to lose even more value. However, there was a different tone struck by Bloomberg, who carried a quote from Fundstrat co-founder and BitMine chairman Tom Lee, and he's saying that he still believes that Bitcoin can reach the $150,000 to $200,000 mark by the end of January next year. He said that he believes the long-term power of retail investors will continue to drive the markets higher up.
Okay, well, for the sake of all those investors, let's hope he's right and people get to avoid that doom loop. I mean, that does sound very much like crypto hell, but fascinating story, Andy. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, after the break, we'll explore how the United States is strengthening its partnership with Azerbaijan, focusing on energy, trade, and regional security. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Prime Time. The United States is strengthening its relationship with Azerbaijan with a focus on energy, trade, and regional security. Forbes magazine reports that Baku's integration into the Central Asian bloc opens new opportunities for cooperation with both the US and Europe. Home to abundant oil, gas, and rare earth minerals, Azerbaijan is emerging as a key hub for global industry and technology.
The United States is strengthening its partnership with Azerbaijan, focusing on energy, trade, and regional security. Forbes reports that Baku's recent integration into the Central Asian bloc opens new opportunities for cooperation with the US and Europe. Azerbaijan is rich in oil, gas, and rare earth minerals, resources that are increasingly important for global industry and technology. According to the International Energy Agency, the country is among the world's most energy self-sufficient nations. US-Azerbaijan ties have long been limited by a 1992 law known as the Freedom Support Act, which included a rule called Section 907. This rule originally blocked direct US aid to Azerbaijan due to its conflict with Armenia. Over the years, US presidents, including George W. Bush, Joe Biden, and Donald Trump, have repeatedly waived this restriction, allowing closer cooperation. Forbes notes that further easing of these rules could open the door to major projects, including transport corridors, pipelines, railways, and fiber optic lines across the South Caucasus. Analysts say the partnership also helps the US counterbalance Russia and China, giving Washington access to strategic resources while supporting Eurasian countries seeking more independence from Moscow and Beijing. For Azerbaijan, the relationship boosts its strategic role in the Caucasus, increases trade and energy links, and enhances its international profile.
Well, joining me now to discuss this in more detail is A News' Anastasia Lavrina. Anastasia, good to see you back in the studio with us.
Thank you for having me.
The deepening ties between the US and Azerbaijan, I mean, frankly, everybody can see that. It's very obvious. But what specific sectors are seeing the most focus?
Well, I guess you rightly mentioned since August 2025, the intensification of the relations between two countries is obvious in all spheres. Both leaders are trying to direct their efforts in the integration, especially in the transport sphere when it comes to the middle corridor. Then, of course, it's energy sectors, which is very important and I will say obvious for all European markets at the moment. And there is a clear understanding in Washington in this sphere. Then the Zangezur corridor, Donald Trump and President Ilham Aliyev are doing their best to implement all of those agreements achieved between Yerevan and Baku in Washington on August 8th, and Zangezur corridor or Trump corridor, how it's being called in Washington, it's among the top priorities. So the future construction, the opening and operational smooth and secure operation of this corridor, it's among the top priorities. And I guess in August signed a memorandum of understanding between two sides also to establish a strategic working group aimed at producing a charter on strategic partnership, which became very obvious, especially during the recent visit of Undersecretary for Political Affairs, Alison Hooker. The US-Azerbaijan Strategic Partnership Charter was kicked off and the working group was established. And it's happened in a parallel way together with the first think tank forum held in Baku just a couple of days before between Azerbaijan and United States. And at the same time, our working group, I will say our big delegation from Azerbaijan was an official visit in Washington in the United States. There were some members of parliament, experts. So both countries are trying to promote the cooperation and development in all spheres to make sure that the progress achieved and the full peace treaty between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and of course to unlock the real potential of the South Caucasus, which is very, very, I will say, obvious for Washington's interest in near future.
South Caucasus is obviously an area of interest, but also to Central Asia now coming into view. We've spoken before about C5 becoming C6. How does that play into the compounding effect, the magnifying effect of the positive things that are emerging from the US-Azerbaijan relationship?
Well, absolutely. C5+1 and now C6+1. It's an obvious format of cooperation for near future. And during the Biden's administration, if you remember, there was also some attempts to increase the presence of the United States in the region of the Central Asia. But during the Trump's administration, there is a clear understanding that this region, Central Asia, is landlocked. And without Azerbaijan, there will not be possible any transport or energy projects. So Donald Trump has more smart policy toward this, and he understands that in order to have the future developments and perspectives, Azerbaijan should be, and it's a must, key partner for Central Asia, for Europe, and obviously for the future interests of the United States in the region of the for the region of the South Caucasus and Central Asia. Azerbaijan is a key bridge between Central Asia and Europe. Also, Azerbaijan's integration means access to Central Asia's large markets and goods flows, as I already mentioned, the middle corridor. There is also a real interest of Donald Trump to increase its presence in order to diminish the presence and involvement of China. I guess later on we can also talk about that. Of course, United States cannot exclude completely China from the region, but at least they can somehow manage their own interest parallel in what China is looking for the region of the Central Asia. Then critical minerals and rare earths, it's also on the agenda of the United States to keep more or less control in this sphere where China is a dominant and number one, I would say, in some specific regions. Trans-Caspian Green Energy Corridor. The green energy is among the priorities for European Union, and the Southern Gas Corridor, which is now under it's operational, and there is also the idea of the future enlargement is being discussed. But on the another perspective, Green Corridor, which is also part of the Middle Corridor strategy, and with its own investments and technology and the cooperation in security sphere, United States has its obvious interest and the presence. But I would like to mention one more aspect, which is also on the agenda and been also mentioned in the article which you referred in the beginning of this episode of your program, the amendments 907, which puts some limitations on the cooperation between the United States and Azerbaijan. And the U.S. Department of Defense outlet Stars and Stripes published an article calling on Congress to fully repeal the 907's amendment, thereby strengthening cooperation between two countries. And the experts are staying a bit skeptical about that because it's a huge process. It requires a lot of to be done in order to remove it completely. But if much depends on the president of the United States, especially during the, let's say, George W. Bush presidency, there were some changes in this particular sphere because United States and Azerbaijan has a close integration in case with Afghanistan. And now when Donald Trump expressed its willingness to increase the presence of United States in the region, so there is a real time to think for the United States to understand how they can change this. And if it's being done in the future, then the limitations are removed or at least reduced, and it definitely also will benefit not only US and Azerbaijan, but US, Azerbaijan, Central Asia cooperation for good flows and some other aspects of cooperation.
Anastasia, so much, as you described, has happened in a relatively short amount of time. The sincere relationship, which we can all see between Presidents Aliyev and Trump, the trip corridor, peace with Armenia, integration within the Central Asian bloc. If you're sitting in Beijing or Moscow and you're watching this development, what are you thinking? What's the reaction likely to be?
Well, I just visited China recently, and there were some questions. So China is very much interested to see how the future of the region being developed in the scope of this cooperation between the United States, Azerbaijan, and Central Asia, because China, since I guess last decade, are so much interested to increase its presence. But it's not about in any case, we will see the competition between three superpowers, between China, Russia, and the United States. Russia has its own interest within the decades, and it's not going to agree the fact that it's going to be diminished within the near future. Of course, Russia is more concentrated on the situation around Ukraine, and China is sure about its future with a Belt and Road initiative, yes, and Middle Corridor as a part of its global initiative. So China's presence and Russia as a neighbor will definitely kept here in the region, but in a parallel way there is a real intent of the United States to increase its presence. I wanted to clarify, as I see the situation, that Azerbaijan will not allow any even superpower to use its interests if it's against the interests of Azerbaijan or its people. It's obviously, it has always been and it will be in the future. Azerbaijan taking into account its own interests and agree to develop partnership only on a mutually beneficial base. But again, with its own innovations, with AI systems, there will always be a competition between the United States and China. That's obvious. So, but United States has its can increase its presence through the let's say future moderation of the situation between Armenia and Azerbaijan, because in any case that agreement was achieved in Washington but not in Beijing. So how the future will be developed between two neighboring countries here in the South Caucasus, Washington will definitely monitor it, and it was also highlighted during the official visits of the high-level officials to Baku in recent days. Then through energy, digital and security cooperation, both Washington and Baku agreed to work together, especially in security ways, and it's in the interest of Washington if Baku to be a guarantor of security in the region of the South Caucasus in partnership with Georgia and Armenia. Also, transport and energy corridors like the South and Gas Corridor, United States has a real chance to increase its presence, from the perspective of security again, and from the perspective of the future enlargement of this corridor, probably if there will be new members like Turkmenistan, for example, who will also join the project in the near future. The middle corridor, just recently we spoke with one American expert who said that probably middle corridor is one of the rare example when both China and United States are interested to see it to be implemented in order to diminish the presence of Russia in the region, because the northern transport route now is operational, but still there are a lot of limitations due to the sanctions. Iran, we do know what is the attitude towards Iran in some European countries, and there is no, let's say, a proper infrastructure for the future. All of those initiatives with the participation of India in the future, which is on the agenda of the European Union, it requires a lot of investments and time to be operational. So Belt and Road with a middle corridor, it's a real project which is already operational and have all chances to be in, let's say, number one in near future for all the members who are involved in this project. China will still dominate in Central Asia through its own projects, especially in Kazakhstan. China invests a lot. And what's really interesting for me, it was when the same American experts mentioned that if it comes to security and let's say any types of infrastructural project, it's more about the United States. If it comes to the investments, money, and let's say non-interference from the outside, apart from the investment side, it's more about China. So China will continue to invest. In the AI and technologies, there will be more or less competition in between, and when it comes to security, it's more to Washington to care about in the near future. That's how I see the situation.
It's very interesting that you mentioned that there's that delineation. It's almost like everybody knows their roles, they know what they're going to get out of it, and of course, the main beneficiary of all of that will be Azerbaijan. So.
Because we are in the middle of that. We are a breach in between, and all countries, all superpowers have to accept the fact that have to take into account the interests of Azerbaijan and consider its position. And it's Azerbaijan who is a guarantor of stability in the region, especially since the conflict between Yerevan and Baku is finished. And Azerbaijan restored in territorial integrity and now is investing a lot to the, let's say, reconstruction in Karabakh and East Zangezur. By the way, American companies, together with Chinese companies and some European and Central Asian companies, has real chance to be a part of this restoration process.
Finally, Anastasia, we've covered so many different elements of this, but I just wanted to get your view on how all of this has transformed Azerbaijan's international profile. How has it changed? What is the best way of characterizing it, do you think, at this point, after all of these pretty positive developments?
Indeed, especially I see it from the perspective of strengthening Azerbaijan's strategic autonomy. Remember, we had a time when everybody was saying, well, Azerbaijan has such a close partnership with Russia and how it can also benefit from the cooperation with other superpowers. And now Azerbaijan does not depend on any other countries, whether in the region or from the global perspectives. Those countries are coming to Azerbaijan and trying to manage good relations in all spheres, from the economic and political perspectives. Azerbaijan has a very strong position on the global arena within the international organization, within the Organization of Turkic States. It also has a good, nice reputation in managing the, let's say, negotiations in between of the parties who has disagreement on some issues, like, for example, Israel and Turkey in Syria, or the future development of Syria. It's also then Israel, probably Azerbaijan will be among those countries who will send the troops to be a guarantor on the agreements on Israel and Gaza. All depends on how United Nations will achieve the final result on these discussions, but still Azerbaijan has its own let's say, a privilege on the future of this position. Then Azerbaijan got its recognition as a key Eurasian transit hub, and it will always increase its position because of the green energy projects, Baku, Tbilisi cars, and now there is a real potential for Azerbaijan and Armenia to cooperate together due to delivery of cargo through the territory of Azerbaijan to Armenia, and then vice versa from Armenia to Kazakhstan and Russia through Azerbaijan. So boosting Azerbaijan's leadership in energy diplomacy. In any case, Europe needs Azerbaijani gas. It has been highlighted many times, and it will be only increasing. Probably there will be, as I already mentioned, new partners joining the Southern Gas Corridor. Then the regional security and mediation. Azerbaijan still to be a guarantor of security in the region, especially since the conflict resolution between two countries. Support for post-conflict reconstruction remains on the agenda for Azerbaijan and for some other countries who are willing to be part of this great process. Again, probably United States will also join some big projects in the region, especially with the operational of Zangezur corridor. It's to be part of the middle corridor, Belt and Road Initiative, and even if it's just a short project, but still it has a great, I will say, political and economic influence for the future. And then more visibility in Central Asia and the Middle East with the situation around Syria and Israel. And Central Asia, we already discussed with you, C6+1, number one on the agenda of in Washington, in Baku, in Central Asia. This is just the beginning. Azerbaijan just joined this project, this process, and for the future we have all possible means to be involved in a global project that has a real value for global players like China, Russia, and the United States.
Anastasia, we are big fans of Inside Politics, but we particularly love it when you find time to come and join us on PrimeTime. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Okay, after the break, fresh tensions over Iran's nuclear program and what the end of its cooperation deal with the IAEA could mean for global diplomacy. Stay with us. Welcome back to PrimeTime. Iran has officially terminated its cooperation agreement with the International Atomic Energy Agency. Now, this move comes after the IAEA Board of Governors adopted a resolution calling on Tehran to grant the agency full access to its nuclear program. Let's take a look.
Cairo agreement between Iran and the International Atomic Energy Agency has officially ended. On Thursday, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi announced that Tehran has sent an official letter to the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency declaring that the agreement is no longer valid. The move comes in reaction to resolution adopted at the IAEA Board of Governors by the United States and 3 European countries. Resolution called on Iran to provide it with access and information regarding its nuclear program as required under UN directives. The document's purpose was primarily to renew and adjust the IAEA's mandate to report on aspects of Iran's nuclear program. But it also stated Iran must quickly provide the IAEA with the answers and access it wants, 5 months after airstrikes by Israel and the US. The resolution passed with 19 votes in favor, 3 against, and 12 abstentions. Diplomats at the meeting in Vienna said Russia, China, and Niger were the countries that opposed it. However, Araghchi described the action as illegal and unjustified, stating that these countries, by disregarding Iran's engagement, have undermined the credibility of the IAEA. Now, current developments show that Cairo agreement is no longer in effect anymore. The agreement, signed on September 9th this year, was a technical cooperation framework aimed at restoring the International Atomic Energy Agency's inspections in Iran after a suspension of cooperation.
And A News's Touraj Shirililo has more from inside Tehran.
Iran announced on Friday cancellation of an Egypt-mediated deal with the International Atomic Energy Agency signed in September, following a resolution passed by the UN Nuclear Watchdog's Board of Governors in Vienna, which called for information about enriched material and access to civilian nuclear sites. Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghai said Tehran, in an official letter to IAEA, stated that the Cairo agreement on new modality of cooperation, which was reached through long negotiations, is now null and void. He condemned as illegal and unjustified adoption of the joint resolution proposed by France, Germany, UK and US on Thursday, saying that further measures will be adopted by Iran as well. Iran suspended its ties with IAEA and seized the nuclear negotiations with the United States mediated by Oman in the wake of airstrikes by Israel and US on its major civilian nuclear sites last June. In September, Tehran and IAEA signed an agreement in Cairo on a new mode of cooperation in the wake of bombing of Iran's nuclear centers under UN verification, including on visits by the UN watchdog's inspectors. Earlier, Iran had laid down the condition that it would consider the new agreement cancelled if UN nuclear sanctions were reimposed, but it did not take action after the sanctions were reinstalled in September. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi was quoted saying in remarks reported on Friday that Iran is prepared for a fair nuclear deal. In an exclusive interview with London-based weekly The Economist, he said that Tehran is ready to go for a deal, but for a fair and balanced one, not a one-sided deal. Tehran has rejected news about secret talks with Washington, demanding compensation from the United States for attacking its nuclear sites in the middle of nuclear negotiations. Turaj Shiralilu, Tehran, A News.
After the break, we'll be taking a look at the trending social media stories with Fidan Sayadli. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Prime Time now. A News' Fidan Sayadli is here to dive into the world of social media. Fidan, what have you got for us tonight?
A lot is happening around the world today. Some of it shocking, some surprising, and some honestly kind of exciting. Let's dive into what's happening in the globe. Sharing this heartbreaking moment from Dubai Air Show. An Indian Air Force jet went down during its display. Here's the moment everyone is talking about. Meanwhile, another story is catching everyone's attention. Air quality in Delhi is back to dangerous levels today, and residents are understandably fed up. Many say the government's small fixes just aren't enough, especially when families are getting sick. Let's take a look.
Air quality in India's capital remained at hazardous levels on Thursday, with Delhi's pollution crisis again sparking calls for stronger government action. Weather agency SAFAR recorded an air quality index of 399, placing the city in the very poor category. Residents voiced frustration over what they see as years of insufficient measures.
This issue of pollution has been going on for the last 10 to 15 years. There's no permanent solution to it unless the government takes a serious stance. If they think by restricting vehicles and imposing curbs, there'll be no change. It won't make a difference. They should set a target to plant at least 20 million trees in Delhi every year.
Pollution must be reduced. Because of pollution, my wife has fallen sick. I am out in the morning even though the government says avoid morning walks. However, I am helpless. Therefore, it has to be reduced.
India aims to expand forest and green cover to 33% of its land area by 2030, up from 24%, as part of its Paris Agreement commitments. Authorities have banned non-essential construction and taken other steps to curb pollution. Each winter, cold air traps dust, vehicle emissions and smoke from crop burning across Delhi and neighbouring districts, leaving millions struggling with respiratory problems.
At the same time, Brazil was dealing with its own unexpected emergency. COP30 took an unexpected turn. A fire broke out inside the pavilion, and everyone had to evacuate. Delegates ended up sitting outside in the humidity while firefighters checked the place. and shifting from climate talks to global crime. So here's a pretty surprising connection you wouldn't expect. Cocaine buyers in the UK might actually be helping fund Russia's war in Ukraine. That's what the National Crime Agency is warning after uncovering a huge money laundering network.
Engine off! Open the door! Open the door!
I suspect that you may have that property on you for the purpose of money laundering, or it's criminal property. Okay, so in relation to that, I'm arresting you on suspicion of being in possession of criminal property. I'm also arresting you because I suspect you may be involved in money laundering. In relation to that, you don't have to say anything, but may harm you defensive. You don't mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given an evidence.
On a completely different note in the tech world, Foxconn, the company famous for building iPhones, just made a surprising move. They revealed a brand new electric car called Model A and announced a partnership with OpenAI, the creators of ChatGPT. So basically a giant of hardware and a giant of AI are teaming up, starting with new AI equipment they will build together in California.
Moving up the value chain to have a faster, deeper, and more forward-looking. When we share and collaborate and thrive, we don't just build products, we build momentum.
We don't just build products.
Our Model A is from Japan. The designs are entirely done by Japanese engineers. And in the future, we will also set up a company in Japan to provide services to our Japanese customers. Our partnership will start with California in the US, because OpenAI's headquarters is in San Francisco. This involves designing a new architecture for the next generation of data centers.
Over in Nigeria, there was a beautiful celebration of tradition and creativity. In Oyo State, beauty isn't just beauty, it's a heritage. Hairdressers gathered for a festival where Yoruba culture took center stage, with traditional braids and modern styles blending together in the best way possible. It's a celebration of identity through hair.
Hairdressers in Nigeria's Oyo State showcased Yoruba heritage on Wednesday, with intricate braids adorned with beads and wooden combs at a cultural festival. The event featured models on a catwalk, displaying old, new and trendy hairstyles. The exhibition was also an avenue for members of the Nigerian Beauticians Association to display Yoruba cultural heritage.
Our culture is our heritage. So, as Ashewa, we want to develop our culture in our own little way.
Formed in 1985, the group now counts more than 10,000 members, reflecting the enduring importance of hairstyling in Yoruba culture.
Hair is an important part of Yoruba culture. Indeed, it is considered number one. It also serves as a major expression of fashion for women.
Founder of the Nigeria Hairdressers Association, Olubunmi Adesanya, said the industry has evolved over decades.
We started with straightening and coiling. We use odd comb to do straightening and coiling. You know, gradually things are changing. Now it's attachment, weave-on, wig. And that's what people are using. But not stopping you to make sure you treat your persona, your ear.
The festival highlighted efforts by Nigerian beauticians to preserve traditional styling techniques while adapting to contemporary fashion demands.
On a similar note, the art world is buzzing after something incredible happened. Honestly, the art world just had one of those "did that really happen" moments. A Frida Kahlo painting has smashed every record out there, becoming the most expensive artwork ever sold by a human. And when you see which painting it is and the symbolism packed into it, the price suddenly makes a lot more sense. Let's dive into it.
appearing on the auction block for the very first time in 45 years. Please note this work has been requested for major upcoming exhibitions at the Museum of Modern Art and Tate Modern in 2026. It may have to go for some time, but that's a lovely first-class issue here, wonderful painting. We wish to thank Professor Louis Martin Lozano for his kind assistance in cataloguing this work, this masterpiece by Frida Kahlo. Give me another one, $45 million, thank you. At 45. At $45 million here. 46, thank you very much indeed. $46 million. Julian, give me 5 again, please, sir. $47 million, it's here. For the Frida Kahlo, $47 million here. A world-renowned artist, an extraordinary example here at $47 million. Wonderful. Fair warning now, it's against you for the last time. At $47 million. It's yours. Thank you very much indeed. Congratulations. Thank you. Congratulations.
From record-breaking art to iconic Hollywood history. Movie people, you're gonna love this. A huge Hollywood memorabilia auction is on the way, and it's packed with iconic stuff. Marilyn Monroe jewels, Wizard of Oz props, Rocky's gloves, and yes, the Jurassic Park clapperboard. Here's what's going up for sale.
We're in our gallery with highlights from 3 auctions that we're having with our partner Turner Classic Movies in December. We have Joseph of Hollywood, which is a collection of screen-worn classic jewelry. We have our Legends of Classic Hollywood sale, which is property from the golden age of Hollywood to about 1970. And then we have our Legends of Contemporary Hollywood sale, which is property from the 70s and 80s to the present. I think the most exciting pieces there are 2 Marilyn Monroe pieces. There is a bracelet that was from the production of Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and there are earrings from How to Marry a Millionaire. So those, she is the most collectible star, and those are maybe the most exciting.
And finally, ending on a moment that blends nostalgia and remembrance. Paris has added a new face to its famous wax museum, and it's one people have been asking about for decades. Princess Diana now has her own statue at the Graven Museum, dressed in the black cocktail dress she wore in 1994. The museum says they wanted to capture her glow, and honestly, they did.
Today we're inaugurating the statue, the sculpture of Lady Diana. We've been wanting to inaugurate this statue for a long time, but we had not been able to. We were planning to do it in 1996. Unfortunately, the terrible accident happened in 1997, and so back then at the Greven Museum, we gave up on the reproduction of Lady Diana. Then 30 years later, it seemed obvious to us to put her on display because our visitors have been asking for it a lot. Why now? I had the chance to go with the team to see her statue at Madame Tussauds London, and we thought that she was a bit lonely, under a cherry blossom tree in front of the royal family, and we felt the desire to reproduce her in a way that London could not, in her revenge dress in which she was born again for a second time.
That's all for today. Don't forget to check our website at anews.tv and of course, all our social media platforms. Back to you guys.
Vidan, a brilliant selection as always. Thank you very much indeed. Well, that brings us to the end of Prime Time. Please do join us again on Monday evening for more insight and analysis. Have a great weekend ahead, and from all of us here at A News, thanks for watching.